Picture it, Sicily, World War II. Now that's the Golden Girls. Anyway, hello everyone, I'm Sarah from Everyday Starlet. Welcome to my channel. I make videos to inspire you to be the star of your own life. I'm continuing my masculine and feminine energies film breakdown series with the Italian film Malena. If you're not familiar with what I mean by masculine and feminine energies, I have a lot of videos going into much more detail, but a brief summary. Masculine and feminine energies are energies live within all of us. We all contain both energies. We all have a core energy. That's when we're most ourselves in. That energy often links up with our gender. It doesn't have to, but it very often does. It can be in wounded or healed versions of either of these energies, and each of these energies contains archetypes. And we contain all of the archetypes within us that we can tap into whenever we need to. I have a lot of videos about the masculine and the feminine archetypes if you want to learn more. And in order to have sexual polarity in a relationship, you need one partner to be in the masculine and one partner to be in the feminine, because opposite energies attract sexually and same energies repel sexually. So let's look at Malena. Malena was actually a requested film. I had a few requests for it. I had never seen this movie before. So this movie is going to be a little bit different than some of my other breakdowns in the sense that a lot of this is not going to be about individual scenes. It's going to be about the overall theme of the movie. I'm going to try to share maybe a few scenes on like my social media and in my shorts and stuff like I usually do with my other breakdowns, but well, a lot of this movie does have a lot of like sex and violence that I seem to get flagged for if I share anything that even hints at violence or sex or anything like that on social media, so I probably won't be able to share too much. But really, this movie is really more about the overall theme as opposed to the individual scenes. This movie is also in Italian. I watched it with English subtitles because I don't speak Italian. If subtitled films are not really your thing, then this movie's probably not going to be for you. This movie is very much an over dramatization of some themes that I think are really relevant even today. The movie was actually from 2001, but it actually takes place in 1941 during the time of World War II. So a lot of the themes in this movie are things that are absolutely still relevant today, and they're over exaggerated, which most of the themes in my film breakdowns are absolutely over dramatized. I find when you see these these energies, these themes, these human behaviors in very over dramatized ways in film, it makes it a little bit easier to pinpoint them so you can spot them in more subtle versions in your everyday life. And it sparks discussion as well, which is why I do these breakdowns. I mostly focus on the masculine and feminine energies and like the relationship dynamics, but I also do kind of have a thing for Hollywood media manipulation and things like that. And it was really interesting when I watched this movie, and this is an interesting thing for me to be thinking based on the theme of the movie, which I'll get to in a minute, but the movie stars Monica Bellucci, and who's gorgeous, she's absolutely stunning. But I'm watching this and I remember thinking like, wow, this movie is a really great excuse to be constantly showing off Monica Bellucci's implants. It's like, oh, there are her boobs again, there are her boobs again. And I don't have a problem with nudity, but like for me, it got to a point where I was kind of like, okay, this is just getting gratuitous. For me, it was just kind of like, oh, this again, right? But then when the credits came on and I realized that this movie was produced by Harvey Weinstein, I was like, oh, so it actually is just an excuse to see Monica Bellucci's boobs. I don't remember the exact year that the Me Too movement thing happened in Hollywood, but I'm sure that this movie from 2001 was before the whole Harvey Weinstein scandal. But like everyone in Hollywood obviously knew about Harvey Weinstein, let's be real. Like nobody was like, oh, I didn't know he was a creep, right? I think the regular American public didn't really know because we didn't really know that much about him. But the fact that he produced this movie, and there actually is a scene in this movie where Malena basically needs to hire a lawyer and she doesn't have the money to pay the lawyer, and she's trying to figure out ways to, like, she's gonna give him the money she has and she wants to figure out a payment plan or something. And he's basically like, no, there's only one way you can pay me. And he forces himself on her, basically. I won't get into the whole Harvey Weinstein thing, but Google it if you don't know what I'm talking about. Like he was accused of essentially doing that, and the lawyer in this movie that does that bears a striking resemblance to him. Like he's kind of like the old, like really heavy set, greasy kind of guy. So art imitating life, life imitating art. Who knows? That part aside, let's get into the themes of Malena. Now, Malena is basically she's essentially like a war widow in this town. And before I get into Malena's character, I want to talk about really the narrator of the film, which is this little boy, Renato. He's 13 years old when the movie starts, and he's really, it's kind of a coming of age story for him. Like he is becoming a man, he's starting to have sexual urges, he is very attracted to Malena as everybody else in the town is. They're basically obsessed with her. This young boy is obsessed with her and he's very sexually attracted to her, but he essentially falls in love with her. The other men in the town, it appears like, at least, because we're not in their head, we're in this little boy's head because he's narrating the story, that he has a lust for her, but he also has a love for her. Like he feels very protective of her, but as a young boy, he doesn't really know how to protect her. Throughout the film, actually, when Malena is hurt and the little boy just doesn't know what to do about it, he actually takes out his anger and aggression, like destroying something, like hitting something or destroying a statue or knocking something over or smashing a window or something, spitting in people's food. Like he channeling his aggression at his desire to protect Malena into physically harming other people, but kind of like behind closed doors, like people don't know that he's the one who's doing all this destruction type of thing. I mean, that's not a healthy way to channel it, right? Like his desire to protect is natural, it's normal, and should absolutely be cultivated, I think, in young boys. We need that more, especially since he seemed to be the only one in the town that cared at all about protecting her. That said, again, he was a boy. He did not know how to channel that anger, that frustration, that aggression, so he was doing it in basically acts of vandalism. There are many cultures that believe that when boys hit a certain age, varies what the age is, but really when they start noticing girls and they start having that sort of sexual urge for women, that's the time when the men in the tribe, in the community, would basically step in and put the boy through initiation processes that would turn him into a man. This movie is really a representation, although this is a different culture. I mean, I grew up in the United States. This is Italy in the 1940s. So, I mean, obviously there's some variations in culture there. I mean, again, it's Italy, so it's a very Catholic upbringing. Where I grew up in this part of the country, like everybody's Catholic pretty much. So there were some definite similarities, I feel like, in this culture and the way that this boy was kind of growing up and the culture today, at least the culture that I've witnessed. There are some initiations that he goes through, but he's not really guided into manhood. And part of the reason he's not been guided into manhood is because most of the men in this town are not men. Like, they're not really grown adult healthy men. They're not masculine leadership. You have this whole town of these basically like these like immature, pathetic boys. I mean, even the grown adults have just no self-control, no self-discipline. The grown men in this town are acting exactly the same as the young boys who are acting immature and slaves to their sexual urges. So you have this young boy who's coming into his own. He doesn't really have great representation of masculine leadership. One of the things that I think is a big difference between the way that these initiations, at least the way that we know of them from like ancient cultures and things, it's the men in the tribe that determine when the boy is ready to become a man. And usually it's before the boy realizes that he's ready to become a man. And one of the problems that we have in this movie, at least, that demonstrates it, and I think we have that a lot in our regular, our Western culture today, is you have boys that, like, they become men and then they have to seek out men to prove their manhood. Like, it's just like, hey, I'm a man now, somebody guide me. And that's what's happening a lot with Renato. And in that time period, even in some cultures, I think you see this in like England a lot too, boys of, until they get to a certain age, they only wear short pants, like they don't wear long pants. Once a boy becomes a certain age, he can graduate to wearing long pants. It's like a kind of a symbol of manhood, like you're not wearing the short little boy pants anymore, you're wearing long pants. In certain cultures, that's a thing. And so you have this Renato who's like, he's like, I want long pants, like I want long pants. And his father actually like starts beating him. And his father's literally so erratic. I mean, I don't want to get into a debate with people about disciplining kids or things like that or whatever. I'm not a parent. I realize that there's a lot of people who don't like people who are not parents talking about disciplining kids and things like that. I'm not trying to get into a debate about that. However, the way that Renato's father is responding to Renato and the way he just starts hitting all the other kids in the house, and he's literally on like this angry rampage. That's not how you discipline children. I'm sorry, it's not. Like, whether or not you believe in like spanking or, certain things or whatever, different debate. When you get into that, like, I'm so angry, I need to hit you, that's when it starts to get into abuse. Now, I realize that discipline, abuse, there's a fine line there. I'm not going to get into that line, but in this situation, Renato's father is clearly in abuse. Like, he's in his anger, he's in his emotions, and he's hitting his kids, his family. When you're in your emotions like that, and then you start hitting somebody, that's a sign of abuse. That's not what a masculine man will do. A masculine man doesn't just like get all caught up in his emotions and then start hitting people. Masculine energy is about being grounded. Like, if you have to hit someone and you have to discipline somebody, it's very different like than just getting all emotional and then just start swinging and hitting things. That's two different things. So culturally, it was somewhat acceptable for fathers to get all caught up in their emotions and just start hitting people. So I realized that probably was culturally accurate for the time. However, it's not really a great representation of grounded masculine strength that is really what this boy needs. Like, that he, instead of having his father get all caught up in his emotions and hit him, he needs a strong representation of masculine leadership so that he knows what to grow into. And that's a big frustration that you have with Renato, which I think is very symbolic of a lot of the frustration you're seeing in young boys, is they don't have role models to turn to, and a lot of them are turning to really bad role models. I have a video about that where I talk about the popularity of Andrew Tate and how, you know, many boys they're so looking for that role model, and when you don't give them a role model, they may choose one that is not a solid, healthy role model. Renato was trying to figure things out on his own, really, which is what a lot of young boys are doing, and unfortunately, you leave young boys to try to figure out their masculinity on their own, and they don't have good, solid role models of masculinity in adult males. They're gonna get really confused, and I think that's where we are right now as a society. Why a lot of men are not stepping into their full masculinity is they just don't know how. Like, they're not guided into that. So Renato becomes very, very sexually attracted to Malena. I'm gonna get into her character in a little bit, but he and all the other men and boys and stuff in town, very sexually attracted to Malena, and this is actually very evident of what's going on right now. Many young boys in this time period, he didn't have access to porn like boys do nowadays. However, he had access to like nude photos and things, and he was fantasizing a lot about Malena and stuff, and he basically started masturbating. And that's actually younger and younger boys are exposed to this kind of pornography of some kind. They start learning to pleasure themselves, but it's very disconnected, right? It literally is programming men's brains to be very disassociated during sex, which most of the time women have a very hard time disconnecting their heart from their sexual activity. As women, it's connected. Our heart and our sacral chakra, our sexual organs and stuff, are energetically connected, so it's very difficult for most women, you know, barring that there isn't like trauma or something like that going on. For most women, it's very difficult for them to separate the two. Most men do not have a natural energetic connection between their genitals and their heart, and when they condition themselves through pornography at a very young age, it disconnects them even more, and it makes it that much more difficult for, you know, men as they get older to make that emotional connection with somebody that they're in a sexual relationship with. It really makes intimacy and sex very separate for men, which is not going to lead to a healthy long-term connection, because in reality, you want to be able to have a long-term sexual relationship where you also have intimacy. And if men are conditioning themselves to not connect sex to intimacy and needing them to be separate, they're gonna have a really hard time maintaining a long-term relationship. And that's essentially what Renato's doing, is he's really training himself to disconnect. It's actually one of the reasons now you see a huge increase in erectile dysfunction in men who are overexposed to porn. It's true, because then when men actually do experience a woman in real life, they can't handle the actual like human interactions because they're so used to it just being virtual or in images or something like that. Like the actual human interaction, like it can't happen. You're seeing so many boys being so disconnected from reality, you know, isolating themselves. Like there's so many negative effects to things like pornography and stuff, especially when we introduce them to boys at such a young age before they have any concept really of what to do with themselves, because this is a very Catholic situation. There was that belief, I don't know if it's in every religion, I know that was kind of like a cliche thing in the Catholic religion, that's like if you masturbate you're gonna go blind or something like that. The father kind of knows what the son is doing, but he's telling him he's gonna go blind, right? So it's like well, he's letting him do it, but he's gonna shame him. Speaking of shame, again, Renato essentially steals one of Malena's underwear that she has hanging on her like clothesline outside her house, and the father finds him sleeping with it. And the father basically turns him into a pervert, tells him he can't go near his sisters, like publicly shames him. Like everyone in the family the mother's freaked out. She's like burning the underwear in like the toilet because she's like so mortified by this. I just did a video talking about society and sexuality and stuff, and how we have this really like convoluted view of like sex is wrong and bad and shameful, but like everybody's doing it and sex is everywhere. And this is a prime example of that. Like with this boy who's trying to figure himself out. He has no guidance, he has no healthy role models, and he's figuring this out on his own. And now you have his father who is shaming him, like publicly shaming him for his sexual expression. And now I don't condone stealing things from anybody, but him being attracted to women's underwear, you know, sexy lacy underwear, is not exactly the worst thing in the world that this kid could be doing, right? But you know, the family is treating it like this is, you know, the end of the world. At one point too, Renato actually like faints and the mother's freaking out, the church is freaking out, they're worried. They think he's possessed by the devil, they're gonna do an exorcism, it's this whole thing, and then the father's basically just like, no, he just needs sex, basically. And the father takes him to a brothel and basically hires him a prostitute. I do know there are cultures in history that believed in, I mean, I've read a lot of stuff about sacred prostitution, and there's a lot of various accounts of what sacred prostitution versus regular prostitution actually was. The whole can of worms that I'm certainly not an expert in, but there are ancient cultures that did believe part of the male initiation was to essentially have a female, they call them sacred prostitutes or sex initiates or something like that, that would come in and actually teach the young male about sex and sexuality and things like that. There's a lot of gray area there, and I'm not going to dive down that road. I'm not here to condone anybody who's underage being sexually active. And this stuff happens nowadays. There was a rapper not that long ago who was like bragging essentially about doing this for his son when he reached a certain age or something. Like this idea of like the father going out and like getting a boy a prostitute or something like that. Like I hope it's not common. I really hope it's not common, but it's not unheard of. But if you think about how confusing that now is for this boy, right? Because he's been told that he's so like a dirty pervert, sexist, shameful, that all of this stuff is wrong, and then his father's like, hey, here's a hooker. Like again, like I talked about in my, you know, society and sexuality video, that's setting anybody up for confusion, right? You're literally like, no, sex is wrong, but like, oh, you need to solve your problem, like here's a hooker. It's so conflicting, and you can see where, especially with boys, and with girls it's definitely confusing, but in this particular case where we're actually looking at like a young boy coming into his own, he not only is not getting any guidance, he doesn't have great role models, but he's also getting so many conflicting messages between the church and the way people are acting and his family life, and all these different messages are all coming at him. And imagine any 13-year-old boy or girl, but we're talking about a young boy at 13, your body's coming into its hormones, you're confused by everything that's going on around you, and all these mixed messages. I mean, it's not surprising that men are confused in reality. Now I would note that Renato's sexual fantasies about Malena are, for the most part, him rescuing her, like him protecting her, which is very different from the way most of the other men are treating her. I do think there is something to the fact that Renato, you know, he's a young boy, he's confused. Does he do everything right? No, absolutely not. He's not having any guidance. He's not having great role models. His heart is in the right place. He just has really no clue how to express it. Now, I'm not justifying some of the things that he does as far as the stealing, as far as the vandalism. He basically spies on Malena. He finds a place in her home that he can actually like peep through. He's a peeping Tom, basically, which is creepy. But it also is representative of the fact that he really is the only male in this entire town that really sees Malena for who she truly is. Which, I mean, it's still wrong the way he does it, but he knows who she truly is, and he loves her anyway, which is very symbolic of masculine energy. And this is a young boy, and he's trying to figure out his masculine energy. He's doing his best, but he's struggling, which is understandable why he would be struggling. Now, Malena is obviously stunning. She's a war widow. Her husband has, you know, she believes, she's been told that her husband has died in war. And you know, she really is just trying to live her life. I mean, she ends up with a lot of death and mourning, you know, losing her husband, she loses her father. She's having a rough time with life, and the men and the young boys, like all the males in this town, are just lusting after Malena obsessively. I mean, this is an exaggerated version, obviously, but it's creepy. It's creepy the level that these men are lusting after her. And as a result, the women of this town despise her. Like, absolutely despise her. Now, I'm gonna get into that dynamic in a minute. I'm gonna focus on Malena right now, and then I'm gonna get into that overall theme in a minute. Like, Malena, well, gorgeous, puts herself together. Like, she's a very classy woman. She puts herself together and looks very elegant, but she's still very suppressed. Like, she knows that people are staring at her. You can tell she's not comfortable with people staring at her. She's very reserved. Like, she looks straight ahead. She walks very directionally. She's obviously got a protective wall up. Like, she's tolerating these men's stare and their gaze, but she's not walking around, she's not smiling, she's not really in a feminine flow. Like, she's very closed down. She's very like shut down, understandably so, because she clearly doesn't feel safe. I mean, she's constantly being leered at. She's constantly having these men have these like grabby, needy, like energetically, these men are being very grabby and needy with her. I'm actually going to do a whole video talking about staring versus leering and that kind of like grabby, needy energy, because I think that's kind of a hot topic right now. So I'm going to do a separate video where I talk all about that, so I'm not going to dive into that too much here. However, the fact that these men have this very like kind of grabby, needy, like lustful, like lecherous energy towards her, it's causing her to shut down. Like she's still walking with her head held high. She's walking very regally, but she never smiles. She is very serious. She's very directional. She only looks where she needs to. She has a masculine shield up. It's a very attractive masculine shield, but she has a masculine shield up. Understandably so. But I just want to note that, because she's not looking for this male attention. She doesn't want this male attention. She's getting all of this male attention. There's an interesting thing that I would note. Many people kind of falsely believe that when you connect to your feminine energy, that's when you're going to attract a ton of men. That like men are going to be flocking to you. Like men are going to be all over you. Like I think a lot of women believe that when they connect to their feminine energy, like their healthy feminine energy, men are gonna start doing this. That men are gonna start like latching onto her and chasing you and leering at you, and it's gonna feel very unsafe. That can happen, but in general, that doesn't tend to happen that way. Because if you notice in this situation, Malena she's absolutely stunning, she's beautiful, but she's still very closed off. And these men are treating her like this. There is something to the idea that as a woman, when you're very beautiful and you have a very sexy look, which may just be because you're born a sexy person, you know, or maybe you're cultivated a sexy look or something, but you're a very sexy woman, like you have sexual energy within you, but you've put that masculine wall up because you need to protect yourself. Opposite energies attract. If you have a masculine shield up, so you are a feminine woman and you have sexual energy, it's brewing underneath you, but you've got a masculine wall up, that masculine wall is probably going to attract feminine men. Men who have no control over their sexual urges are usually in their feminine energy. Masculine men, while they absolutely are attracted to feminine women, when they're in their healthy masculine energy, they have a sense of self-control and discipline. So they're not going to be desperate and needy chasing after this woman just because she has some sexuality to her. Masculine men are very grounded. So the masculine is the pursuer, but there's a difference between pursuing and a man who is very like needy and needs to chase someone. Like those are two different energies. That needy needing to chase someone, that like not having control of your sexual urges, sexual desires, it's usually a very wounded feminine energy. That neediness, that like latching onto that's usually a man when he's in his very wounded feminine energy. If you're, as a woman, have that masculine shield up, it can very often draw in the exact type of man that you have put that wall up for. I know, catch-22. Not fair, but that's the way it works. This is actually something that I noticed in my feminine energy journey. Of course, I really started diving into my femininity journey when everything was all locked down, so I was kind of like always in private, essentially. I did notice when I would actually go out into the world, in the past, I would go out into the world and I would say a little bit more like Malena. I don't look like Malena, obviously, but I would walk through the world, but very like directional, closed off, like kind of like, oh, don't look at me, this is making me uncomfortable. And I would get a lot of like that kind of gross attention from guys. So when I started working on my feminine energy, and people would tell me like, oh, you're working your feminine energy, like men are gonna flock to you. So I was like, oh my God, is this gonna be uncomfortable? Like, what's this gonna be like? And I remember I was actually walking through, I had to go out to the city a while ago, and I was walking through the city, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna stay open. I'm open my feminine. And I didn't really get noticed that much at all. There was a part of me that was like, oh, well, maybe I'm doing this wrong. I'm not getting male attention, which is not the right mentality to have, because your feminine energy is for you. It's not for men. It's for you. I don't say this from like a screw men kind of way, but in reality, your feminine energy is your birthright. It's for you. Always remember that. And then I realized, I was like, well, no, I'm not getting that same male attention I was getting before, but I'm also not getting like that needy, grabby, lecherous attention. And there is something too, when you actually start carrying yourself in a more open way, there's a lot of men who are going to be repelled by that, because if they're not in their full masculine energy, they're going to be repelled by a woman who is fully in their feminine energy, because same energies repel. So if a man is in more of his feminine energy and he sees a woman who's actually like open and embracing her feminine energy, he's gonna likely be repelled by that. Now, there's a caveat to that I want to note. If you do get approached by a very lecherous guy or a man who's very much in his feminine or something like that, I don't want you to automatically assume it means you're doing something wrong, because there are men out there, there are creeps, and there are men who are wounded and things like that that are just gonna go after anything. I mean, that's just life, right? They're not paying any attention to what energy you're in or what you're giving off. They're literally just like, female, I'm gonna try to get what I can get from her. All you can do in that situation is to hold yourself in high enough regard to know that those people are not worth your time and not entertain people like that. But don't automatically assume because somebody, you know, is not what you want that is coming after you, because I fell into that honestly early on, where I was like, oh no, I attracted somebody who wasn't what I wanted, I must be doing something wrong. It was like, well no, he was just shooting a shot with anybody. You know, I have to keep on my path and keep working on myself and keep doing what I need to do. And eventually those guys kind of just, they're still there, but you don't really notice them, because it's like, why? Not like on your energetic level, like you're not a match energetically. I'm not trying to put the blame on Malena, because this town is obviously like seriously creepy, and it's an exaggerated version obviously of life, but her putting that wall up was kind of counterintuitive, because while yes, she felt like it was protecting her, it was kind of almost drawing in the wrong kinds of men. If she'd done something differently, would it have been different? I don't know, it's a film. In reality, sometimes having that wall up can actually be counterintuitive, so just be mindful of that. Sometimes those walls, those blockages, I mean, not only are they going to potentially block out people that you do want, they might actually be unintentionally drawing in the people that you don't want. Really what it is because Malena is only showing her surface feminine. She's very beautiful. She's dressed very beautifully. She's not needy for this male attention, but she doesn't even want the male attention. So she's literally just showing this surface beauty, but she's not actually representing any depth to her. She's meeting men who only want her for superficial beauty. Not justifying men being shallow and superficial. However, that is very common. If you as a woman are only showing up with superficial beauty, you're probably gonna meet a man who is meeting you with only wanting superficial beauty or only wanting a superficial relationship. It's the same as a man, if you're showing up and you only say have money to offer a woman, you're probably gonna meet women who only want you for your money. If you show up somewhere and you're only offering the surface of whatever or something very superficial, you're gonna attract people who are looking for something that's just superficial. So if you want more depth in your life, you have to connect to that depth within yourself. I'm not saying this to say that Malena should have been doing anything different in general, because again, in this town, who knows, but it's just a note for women in real life to understand that if you find yourself only focusing on the superficial aspects of your feminine energy, you're probably going to attract a man who's only looking for a superficial feminine woman. Whereas if you show up as a feminine woman with the depths of you, like your feminine energy from within, men who are just looking for the superficial, I mean, they might come around, but they're probably gonna be weeded out because like they're not gonna be able to handle your depth, right? Like I mentioned in my Titanic breakdown, like the feminine is like the ocean. Like the feminine is beautiful and serene, but if a man can't handle like your deep dark waters of the feminine, he's just gonna drown. Right? So in reality, as a woman, the more depth you can get within yourself, the more depth in a man you're gonna be able to attract. There is a moment in this movie that I really love, and that is, I mean, I don't love that Renato is spying on Malena, but there's a moment where he's basically like peeping through the peephole in her house. She doesn't know that she's being watched, but she's alone, she's in her house, and she's just in a slip, which is obviously like a very silky slip. She turns on some music, she's flowing around her house, like her hair is just kind of like pinned up kind of in curlers, and she's like dancing around, and she has a picture of her love of her husband, who at that point is off at war, and she holds the picture and she's slow dancing with it. She's like imagining that she's with her love, and she's just sort of flowing through her house in just this relaxed feminine flow. Like that's her feminine energy, and she only feels safe to express that obviously when she's alone, or likely when she's with her husband, because I mean he's just there in spirit at that point because he's away at war at that point in the movie. But you get the impression that she probably can express that with her husband, which is why she's having this moment of like holding the photo of him and having this beauty, right? So her husband is who she feels safe with, but everybody else she doesn't feel safe with. So that to me is so significant. If you watch her like walking down the street with all these men creepily on her, you can see why she would shut down her feminine, because it wouldn't feel safe. Whereas when she's alone, or when she's with her husband, her love, her trusted partner, that's when she can be her. And she's not done up. You know, when she goes out in the street, she's like done up, she's put together, everything is just in place. But when she's alone, like that's when her beauty shines. Like that's when she's her most radiant. She's in her sensuality, she's in her radiance, her beauty. Being feminine isn't about having everything polished and perfectly in place. Being in your feminine is really about connecting to your senses, being in flow, finding the joys in life, finding love in life, moving and flowing. And you can do things, but you're not doing things from that like directional, like hustle mindset. You're doing things from like a natural flow of your life. Like that's connecting to your feminine energy. And oh, that scene, I absolutely love that scene. Like watching her do that is just like the absolute epitome of feminine energy. But if you notice, she's only comfortable doing that again when she's alone, or likely with her masculine partner. We don't actually see her alone with him, but you get the impression from the way she's holding the photo and looking at the photo that she does feel comfortable with him, as opposed to all the other men in town that like want this from her. Like they want her sexuality, but they're so needy and grabby about it that she has to shut it down because she doesn't feel safe to open, because these men are just so like creepy, really. Okay, so let's look at the men and the women of this town. This is extreme, right? And I feel like this is extreme to make a point, but all the males, grown men and little boys in this town, are obsessed with Malena, but none of them have any self-control, which means they're not operating from their masculine. I talked about this in my Titanic breakdown when I talked about sexual discipline. Also on my society and sexuality video. The masculine is disciplined. The masculine has discipline. That has to include sexual discipline. Now, yes, men have a biological urge to be very attracted to the feminine, particularly women. They do have a natural biological urge to spread their seed. Like those things are all real. However, if you as a man are a slave to your biological urges, you're not trustable. A masculine man has to have discipline in order for him to be a trustable leader. If you want to be the masculine energy in your life, in your relationships, in the world, you have to have discipline, and that includes sexual discipline, because if you are just a slave to your biological urges, you're not going to feel stable, you're not going to feel grounded, and people aren't going to trust you. Now, the thing that I find very interesting is that because these men are so lustful after Malena, the women in this town all despise her. They're starting rumors about her, they're mistreating her. At some points, they're not even selling her food because they hate her so much. And I find it very interesting that I see a lot of men today that want to point out that like, oh, well, women are worse to other women than men are to women. Like, women want to complain about misogyny, but it's women who are the ones who are, you know, cruel to other women. That does happen. It is a real thing. However, the reason women are doing that is because they're responding to the way the men are treating women. As much as we focus on the man's biological urge to spread the seed, women have a biological urge to mate with the man that they have sex with, because if she's pregnant, in reality, and not that far back in human history, mind you, women were not able to survive without a masculine partner. So if a masculine partner left them, themselves and their children were essentially left for dead. Now in our modern day society, I think in many Western cultures, we think like that's ridiculous. Like women can survive without a man. That's a pretty current thing. That's not something that historically has been true. There are places in the world today where if a woman and her children are left by the man that is supposed to protect them, they're left for dead. They're not going to survive. So while that is not actually going on in most of like our Western culture in today's world, many women are being single mothers, many women are surviving without men. As women, it's deeply ingrained in us to keep the family together, to keep the man in our life for survival. As a woman, if your man is attracted to another woman, in your brain you're like, that's a threat to my life. Like that woman is threatening my life. Now in reality, it's the man that's actually the one causing the problem. It's his lack of discipline and it's his complete lack of empathy or caring about the person that he's with that's making this woman feel unsafe. However, if as a woman you are conditioned to believe that if you lose this man, you're left for dead and your children are left for dead. Like, you're gonna have in the back of your head, like, okay, I have to get rid of this other woman. Like, we have to blame this other woman for this, because you have to convince yourself that you have to stay with this man, even if you know that he's the one who's the problem, because it's survival, right? Again, I'm not saying that any of this is healthy, but you see it time and time again, even today. I've been in so many women's groups where you'll get a woman who will basically say that she was dating a guy and she found out that he was married. And so she ended things with the guy, but she's like, do I tell the wife? Do I not? And the number of people that are like, don't tell the wife, she's not gonna leave him anyway. They know that even if the wife knows, she's gonna stay with the husband. In our current society today, women don't have to do that. In most cases, women don't have to stay with a man if he is unfaithful, or, you know, if he crosses a line with her. But in reality, for most women, we still have that biological alarm in our brains. It's like, oh my God, if I lose this man, I'm gonna be left for dead and my children are not gonna be safe. Now, in the same way that men need to be above their biological urge to have to just spread their seed everywhere, women need to work through that biological urge to keep a man under any circumstances, right? Like, those are not healthy states to be in for either men or women. Like, we as humans need to get beyond our biological urges. However, that's where the basis of this comes from, right? I can't tell you how many times this used to drive me crazy. I remember I'd be out someplace and like I'd see a couple, like a man and a woman together, and the man would check me out, and then the woman would be like giving me these like filthy looks. And it used to make me so mad at the guy, because I was like, you know what, this girl and I might have been friends. Like, we might have had plenty of things in common. Like, maybe we could have gotten along, or maybe we never would have met. I don't know. But like, this girl literally hates me now just because of this man's behavior, because he couldn't keep his eyes to himself, because he couldn't control what he was looking at or what he was doing, or control where his attention goes. As he didn't have any discipline, he now created this like weird hatred between two women that didn't have to be there. So I think it's really important that men need to acknowledge, and men are so big on accountability nowadays, they need to take accountability for the fact that women hating on each other rarely comes out of the blue. Like, women are actually designed to be in sisterhood, to be connected with each other, to birth, to cycle together. I mean, women are meant to be in sisterhood. It's men and their lack of self-control and their philandering behavior or their lecherous behavior that pits women against each other. Without that, women don't have to compete with each other, because we're not worried about other women being a threat to our relationship. So as much as I think there are a lot of men who want to deflect the whole idea of like women are crueler to each other than men will ever be to women, sorry guys, that argument really doesn't work, because at the end of the day, women are not naturally competitive, especially with each other. It's men and men's behaviors, and the fact that honestly in our society, we've created this society essentially where it's very similar to the culture in Malena. I mean, this is obviously a very extreme, like over-dramatized version of it. But when you create a society where men are just like, I don't have to have any sexual discipline, it's normal. Like, we literally, we make it seem as if like men can't help themselves. The number of times, if I hear another man say, this is how men are, you just gotta deal with it. If you as men do not have any ability to have discipline or self-control, or you can't get beyond your biological urges, you're not qualified to be a leader. You're not qualified to lead a relationship, to lead a business, to lead a community. You're not qualified to be a leader. If you do not have self-control, self-discipline, sexual discipline, you can't be a leader. You can't do it. People aren't gonna trust you, because you need discipline in order to be a leader. This movie just, I feel like, highlighted this it's an over-dramatized way, but it's true. And the fact that these men were so, I mean, again, they were taking, right? Masculine energy is giving. And I think this is actually one of the biggest misconceptions, because when someone first told me that masculine energy is giving energy, is providing energy, I was like, no way, that's not true. Like, I don't need men that give. I mostly knew men in the course of my lifetime that were like the men in this community. They were takers. These men in this community are takers. Like, they're literally trying to like steal her sexual energy. In some cases, they actually literally force themselves on her. In some cases, they're blackmailing her. They're like, hey, there's no other way that you can get food. I'm not gonna hire you for a job, which is what she was trying to do. I'm just gonna give you food if you give me sex. They literally turned her into a prostitute because she had no other choice for survival. But they were only doing for her, or doing things to help her to get something. That energy is what makes women feel so unsafe to receive, because so many women have only been exposed to men who have that taking energy, or that like, I'll give to you, but you need to give me something in return, that transactional thing. In any situation, masculine and feminine, there's an exchange of energies, but when it becomes this, I need you to give me something that I need from you, and that like needy energy, and that like kind of, I'm just blackmailing somebody into getting what you want from them, it's gonna make women shut down, and they're not gonna feel safe and open to receive. It's literally men like in this movie that are the reason why women are so shut down from receiving. I actually just saw an interview that Jordan Peterson did where he was talking about, you know, so many women today have never had a positive experience with men. And in some cases, very negative experiences with men. This is exactly what that is. It's that energy of, I have to shut myself down from men because I don't trust when men do something nice for me, because I feel like they're going to expect something from me that I'm not going to be comfortable giving to them. Oh, this movie really just demonstrated that in such a heightened version. If you do watch this movie after this breakdown, there's some trigger stuff in there for sure. So, you know, proceed with caution. One point in the film, the women of this village basically like beat Malena. They beat her senseless, which was another excuse for her boobs to fall out. It's like, why did her boobs have to fall out? And it's kind of like, okay, this is gratuitous, right? These women just beat her, and some of the men kind of like are like, oh, should we step in? And you actually hear the guys like, no, let the women handle this, let the women take care of this, this is between the women. These men wanted to take from her, like these men wanted something from her. They were so needy, they were so like attracted to her, they were willing to let this woman get beaten in the town square basically by these jealous women, and none of them stepped in to protect her. The fact that the only person who had any drive to protect this woman was a 13-year-old boy, didn't know how to protect her, and understandably so. It's not a 13-year-old boy's responsibility to protect a grown woman. And he obviously carried a lot of guilt for the fact that he was struggling to protect her, but that shouldn't be on him. The fact that this whole village of like grown men was not willing to step up and protect this woman, but yet they were all willing to sleep with her. Some of them tried to marry her, some of them tried to leave their wives for this woman, but yet none of them actually wanted to protect her. Ooh, that got me angry. That I was just like, oh my god. We have a whole village of men who have no clue what it means to be a man. And you wonder why this 13-year-old boy was struggling so much with how to become a man. He had no role models. And the women were going crazy because at the end of the day, I mean, they literally turned into a wounded masculine where they were basically like beating somebody in the town square because these men were just so not masculine. And I think we have a lot of that going on today, where you have a lot of pitting the blame on this and pitting the blame on that, and men are like, women aren't feminine anymore. Women can't be feminine in a world where men are this dangerous, where men are this unsafe. It's gonna kill off femininity. It reminded me a little bit, I mean, this movie's a little bit different, but it reminded me a little bit of Chocolat. I have a breakdown of that where it's like you have this whole village that's just like shut down completely to like true feminine energy, which happens very often. And I'm not trying to knock anybody's religion or anything, but that happens very often in overly religious cultures where religion tends to control people's behavior. Religion very often, not all religions, but many mainstream religions today are essentially shutting out feminine energy completely. And when you shut out feminine energy completely, a lot of stuff goes wrong. You end up with a lot of toxic behavior, you end up with a lot of men who don't embody their masculine. Spoiler alert, at the end of the movie you find out that Malena's husband actually did survive the war. She was told that he had been killed, but he was actually a war prisoner. He comes back looking for her, and it's actually Renato that essentially helps him find Malena. And he brings Malena back to his hometown, because this had been his hometown. And now that she's back, she's married, she's with him, she's been through all this, so she's kind of aged a little bit. The women in the town are all like, oh, okay, now we're okay with her. It's like she's taken, she's off the market. And they even say like, she's got sprinkles on her eyes, she's gained a little bit of weight. I mean, they're kind of implying that this woman feels like less of a threat. But in reality, Malena is now back to being very closed off again. And she has this husband now who's gonna protect her from all these lecherous men. So the women don't have to worry as much about her because there's a man there who is protecting her. This is over dramatized, and I think that there's a lot of people who are gonna use this as an argument about like, oh, women are much more comfortable with less attractive women. And to some extent that might be true in our current society. However, it's usually been my experience in my life, and I've been in a lot of circles, in my life of various circles. I've been in circles in my life where every woman there was a hell of a lot more attractive than me. I've been in circles of people where I was by far the most attractive person in the group, and every scenario in between. And I can be totally honest with you that I don't really find it's necessarily, at least in my experience, my attractiveness level that determines whether or not a woman treats me well. I find a lot of it has to do with, for one, how I carry myself and how I talk to women, the way I interact with women. So some of that is within my control, but it also has to do a lot with how do the men in that environment treat me, how stable and how grounded are the men in that environment. And I will tell you that in my experience, and I used to work with mostly men, in every situation where I was, like, say I was working with somebody's husband, he was a faithful man and he was respectful. When I met the wife, she didn't have an issue with me because she trusted her husband, and he was not being creepy, he was not being lecherous. And I rarely had a problem with wives in that situation. The only times I really would have issues with women is either when the woman was like super insecure or when she was with a guy that made her feel insecure. And those were usually the times when women would treat me worse. So we can kind of put the blame on women and their behaviors, but at the end of the day, especially if we have a society where we believe that men should be masculine and the masculine should be the leaders, which I agree with. Not everybody agrees with that, but I agree with that mentality. If you are going to have that, then women in general are going to adapt to the culture and society that men create. Women are kind of like a litmus test for how well a man's leadership is. If a man is a safe, grounded, masculine leader, more often than not, he's going to have a relaxed feminine wife. There was actually a woman I saw on TikTok, I don't remember her name, but she was talking about how her mother always said, like, you can tell how good a husband is by how good the wife looks. Like, if she looks like relaxed and happy and she's like aging really well and everything, then you know that she's probably got a good husband. If a woman looks like she's just like run down and tired and like aging rapidly, she probably has a horrible husband. There is something to that. So this movie is really not about the individual scenes so much. It's really about kind of the overall themes, but it did give me a chance to talk about some things that I really wanted to talk about. And I'm gonna dive a little bit more into the concept of like leering versus staring and male attention and things like that in another video, so be sure you check that out. Trigger warning if you decide to watch this movie after you watch this video, but if you do decide to watch the movie, see if you can pick up on some of the things that I mentioned in this video. If you enjoyed this video and found it helpful, please give it a big thumbs up and be sure you subscribe to my channel. Any thoughts on this movie, suggestions, or anything, let me know. I'd love to hear from you. Leave a comment in the comment section below. If you're a woman who wants to connect to her feminine energy, I have online courses, details in the description box below, along with links to all my social media accounts. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I hope you join me next time.